Hi and welcome to the channel. Today we're going to have a look at the Tailteann Games. For the want of a better way of phrasing it, Ireland's ancient Olympics. Although the Tailteann Games actually predate the Olympics by about 1,000 years and they predate the modern Olympiad by millennia. Ireland, for a small country, has constantly punched above its weight in areas like art, literature and music, and sport is no exception. In fact, sport probably more than the others. We have the second ranked rugby team in the world, and we finished 19th in the recent Olympic medal table. This is despite having a country that has a population of less than most major capital cities in the world. So why do we excel specifically in sport? We also, by the way, if you look at some of the surnames of the athletes competing for most of the English-speaking nations in the Olympics, like Australia, USA and Britain in particular, you will see a good spattering of Irish diaspora surnames in there. So why do we excel in sport in particular? Well, it goes back a very long way. Our national sport, hurling, is thousands of years old. The oldest field game in the world and the fastest. Was basically invented to teach warriors how to fight. One of our biggest mythological warriors, Cuchulainn, was famous for hurling. And it goes back a very long way. So what we're going to have a look at today is the Tailteann Games, these ancient games, and a little look at how they tried to revive them, not entirely unsuccessfully at the time, but it was quite short-lived. But we'll have a look at all that, and I hope you find it interesting. A 1,000 years before the ancient Olympic Games were founded, the Tailteann had arrived in Ireland and defeated the Fir Bolg, establishing their place in the Emerald Isle. The mighty Queen Tailtiu had married Eachod mac Éiric of the Fir Bolg, but he was killed during the invasion of Ireland by the Tuatha, so the leader of the invaders, Eachod Garov, took her for his wife. This was the father of the famous hero Lugh Lámhfada, the Ullagh Éireann, or Grand Master of the Arts and Sciences, and so she became the foster mother of Lugh. She laboured long and hard for a new family, too hard in fact, for after she had cleared the plains of wood and stones so they could be planted, she died of exhaustion. She told him in her sickness, feeble she was but not speechless, that they should hold funeral games to lament her, zealous the deed. About the calends of August she died, on a Monday, on the lunas of Lugh. Round her grave, from that Monday forth, is held the chief fair of noble Éireann. White-sided Tailtiu uttered in her land a true prophecy, that so long as every prince should accept her, Éireann should not be without perfect song. In great grief at the loss of such a powerful queen, Lugh declared that games should be held in her honour at least every 3 years, although usually more often. And she was buried under the mounds at a place we today know as Tailteann in County Meath. The games became the greatest spectacle of the ancient world, renowned throughout all the lands for their grandeur and energy. For almost 3,000 years they were held without pause or break in the tradition, until the coming of the Normans in around 1171, when they were suppressed for some time. Finn MacCool himself was said to have joined them to find warriors for his Fine, as well as Cuchulainn and most of the ancient heroes of Ireland. The Éineacht Tailteann or Tailteann Festival was convened by the High King and held from roughly mid-July to Lunasa, sometimes spanning the whole month, being the most important event of the year. People could come from near and far, and the festival symbolised the High King's magnificence. The fertility festival of Carmoon was held at the same time, once every 3 years. The mound at Rathdew, or Black Rath, was ringed by a low earthen rampart on which the spectators sat while games were celebrated on the circular green sward before their feet, and this would have been about 85 metres across. Each festival was in 3 parts: giving honour to the dead, the proclamation of laws, and the funerary games and festivals, which followed. There was a universal truce throughout the games, with severe penalties for breaking it, and all blood feuds and vengeance taken would be left aside. Pity that doesn't happen with the Olympic Games today. The Druids chanted Dark Guba, songs and Ceapogs, memorial songs for those who had died, joined by the friends and families of the fallen for up to 3 days, after which the dead would be burned on a single enormous funeral pyre until they were turned to ash. After this began the official business of the land, and the masters of Ireland, those most skilled in sciences and arts, would convene with the bards and the druids to tell the people of any new laws that had been decided upon. This was ended with the lighting of another enormous bonfire. And then, last but far from least, began what most saw as the main event, the Cuailleadh Fuait. These were games and shows that tested the skill and power of the people of Ireland. Chariot and horse racing were the main events for a while, although unlike the Greek and Roman counterparts, jockeys and charioteers weren't held in high regard. And this part of the festival was held near, interestingly, where the Curragh racetrack can be found today. So horse racing at the Curragh goes back quite a long way. As well as horse races in various sorts, hurling was important, although the teams could be as large as 150 on each side. There was also artificial lakes dug and water sports were held on them. As well as those events, the games featured long jumps, high jumps, spear throwing contests, contests of strength, sword fighting, archery, swimming, rowing, wrestling, boxing, staged battles and slinging. The old people of Ireland understood well that there was more to life than physical prowess, of course. So there was storytelling, theatre, poetry competitions, music, singing, dancing, fidceal competitions, that is an ancient board game of Ireland. Goldsmiths, jewellers, weavers and armourers competed with their wares to win the favour of the nobility and royal house. Marriages were arranged at this time also, during the festival, and work was prepared for the winter. A peculiarity of the Tailteann festival was the mass marriages were held, a sort of trial marriage, and if it didn't work out, the couple could separate without blemish to their reputation by walking away from one another on separate hills. The old Brehon law text attests to this practice, which was legal until the 13th century, as the tradition has described. A number of young men went into the hollow on the north side of the wall, and an equal number of marriageable young women to the south side of the wall, which was so high as to prevent them from seeing the men. One of the women would put her hand through the hole in the gate, and a man took hold of it from the other side, being guided in his choice only by the appearance of the hand. The two, thus joined hands by blind chance, were obliged to live together for a year and a day, at the expiration of which time they appeared at the Rath of Tailteann, and if they were not satisfied with each other, they obtained a deed of separation and were titled to go Laganini again. to try their good fortune for the ensuing year. The annals of the Four Masters tell us that the Tailteann Games were held almost every year for many centuries, even noting that one festival was missed in 873 AD, and that the last games before the Norman invasion were held by King Roderick O'Conor in 1168. The horse procession extended in a continuous line from Tailteann to Mullockatee, which is about 10 kilometres. A fair with gold, with silver, with games, with music, of chariots, with adornment of body and soul, by means of knowledge and eloquence. A fair without wounding or robbing of any man, without trouble, without dispute, without raving, without challenge of property, without suing, without law sessions, without evasion, without arrest. It sounds interesting that in them days they could put all that aside, and we can't today. The games were revived occasionally in the medieval period, and the town known as Tailtiu was where the powerful O'Neill dynasties assembled their armies. The modern Tailteann Games took place in the aftermath of a bloody civil war that had resulted in thousands of deaths and destruction of the Irish infrastructure. Whilst the Free State was not yet a republic, they wanted to demonstrate that they were culturally independent, and hosting a massive sporting and cultural event was the ideal way of projecting that. One of the first decisions was made by the new Free State government was to stage the Tailteann Games and ultimately give £10,000 to the GAA to renovate Croke Park to stage the opening and closing ceremonies. But support for the Tailteann Games wasn't universal. In advance of the first games in August 1924, Sinn Féin, led by Eamon de Valera, published a pamphlet pleading with the public not to give any aid or encouragement or to promote or participate in the games or festivals, as the true aspirations of complete independence had not been met. The problem with that particular side in the Civil War is it was no compromise and all or nothing, even though they did compromise later on. The party had particular concerns over the Irish diaspora travelling from abroad and not seeing motherland as we would wish her to be seen. Despite these calls and a formal boycott of all events by Sinn Féin, the Games proceeded in front of a large attendance. The Tailteann Games were part of a phase between the 1890s and 1930s where mega events became an integral part of Western modernity. The increase in the number of large-scale international events such as world fairs in the late 19th century, the Olympic Games in 1896 and the World Cup in 1930 were tied to the idea of progress and growth. These mega events reflected the quest for technological industrial progress, and early mass media in the form of newspapers and radio coupled these events with the emergence of an increasingly global and mobile society. However, there was also competition between nation states when it came to these events, and the Tailteann Games was no different. The principle of the Tailteann Games were of international integration, yet there was a deliberate demarcation from certain sports. For this reason, the programme did not include cricket, soccer or rugby, which were viewed as traditionally British pastimes. The crossovers with the Olympic Games were obvious and deliberate. Organisers of the event even timed the Tailteann Games so they coincided with the athletes travelling overseas for the Summer Olympics. In the 1924 Olympics in Paris and the 1928 Olympics in Amsterdam made attending the Tailteann Games in Ireland reasonably attainable for a large number of people. And 24 medal winners from the Paris Olympics competed in the inaugural Tailteann Games. This development turned the Tailteann Games into a major tourist attraction and a vehicle to shape the image of Ireland as the host country, which assured the hospitality of the Irish people for sportsmen and sightseer alike. In order to take part in the Games, the participants were supposed to be either Irish birth or Irish heritage. However, this rule was flexible, and the organiser, J.J. Walsh, invited famous athletes in order to attract large attendances. These notable athletes included Johnny Weissmuller, a swimmer who later became famous as the actor who played Tarzan, alongside an Irish actress, Maureen O'Sullivan. Harold Osborne, US long jumper, and well-known artists such as Sean Keating and Margaret Clark. Teams came from England, Scotland, Wales, the US and other countries with Irish emigrant communities, including New Zealand, South Africa, Australia and Argentina. In 1924, there were 6,500 competitors across 20 different categories. In 1928, the Games saw over 30 categories, including handball, camogie, chess, motorboat racing, architecture and dancing. That is where it differs from the Olympic Games in that other artistic pursuits were included. There was a full complement of Gaelic Games tournaments, of course, for men and women. The entire city was utilised, with swimming in the Phoenix Park, rowing in Island Bridge, chess competitions in Trinity College, yachting competitions in Dunleary and boxing in Portobello. The art competition took place in the RDS, where most of the major Irish painters and sculptors of the period competed, and a series of dramas were staged in the Abbey Theatre. There was a marathon from Navan to Croke Park, which is where most of the athletes' competitions took place. The opening ceremony took place in Croke Park and it remained a focal point for the entirety of the Games. The opening ceremonies kept with the style of the modern Olympics and paraded the athletes from all competing nations along with music, pageantry and elaborate fireworks displays. The press labelled the Games the return of the Gael. The Irish Times lauded the Games as an enormous success full of brilliant performances which have given a tremendous impetus to Ireland and Irish sport. They also concluded that the Games were the most important psychological moment in the history of the Irish Free State. Victorious athletes received medals which were designed by Oliver Shepherd. Medals were relatively easy to win as there were over 1,000 up for grabs. In 1928, famous tenor John McCormack donated a silver trophy for the vocal competition. The trophy, which is now in the collection at the National Museum of Ireland, is elaborate in its craftsmanship and would have cost a considerable amount of money for Mr. McCormack to commission and to have specially engraved. However, there were to be only two winners of the trophy: Duncan McCuaig and Eleanor Sterling, as the Tailteann Games would wrap up after 1932 iteration. 1932 was when the event lost its power and prestige, probably due in some part to it being tied to the Olympics. This particularly the international dimension of it. The Summer Olympic Games that year were held in Los Angeles, so most athletes were on the long journey across the Atlantic Ocean, and a stop off in Dublin was less convenient this time around. This resulted in a less competitive and compelling event for the spectators. The city had just held the Eucharistic Congress a week beforehand, so many people may have been suffering from mega event fatigue by the time the Tailteann Games came around.
The Tailteann Games also left a deficit in funding, which had to be settled by the central government. They were due to be held again in 1936, but major international dispute left Irish athletes in disarray. The glory, excitement and fascination of previous years had well and truly departed. All told, the staging of the Games was a remarkable achievement in the context of a new state, and it brought positive international attention to the Irish Free State. More women took part in the Tailteann Games than the Olympic Games, and it succeeded in its attempt to promote Irish pastimes, industries and culture. It also brought much needed tourism in the aftermath of the Irish Civil War. The Tailteann Games cemented the link between ancient and modern Ireland, and in doing so, a new chapter in the history was created. The Tailteann Games name, however, does still live on in an annual cycle race which has been held in Ireland since 1953, the Ross Tailteann or Tailteann Race. So, is a revival of the Tailteann Games likely in the modern era? I think with the full programme of events for elite athletes worldwide, it is unlikely. An event including athletes of Irish descent, well, given the amount of Irish names that was in the last Olympics competing for Britain, Australia, the USA, there are plenty of athletes of Irish descent out there, elite athletes of Irish descent out there. Whether they would be inclined to or convinced to compete in such a games, I think is unlikely. As I said, given the packed programme of events that they already have with their various clubs, continental events and world events on top of the Olympics, I think it's unlikely. And strangely enough, although Ireland had, in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, the infrastructure to hold the games as they were then, Ireland simply at the moment wouldn't have the infrastructure, sadly, to stage such a major sporting event. It's interesting that the whole thing around the Tailteann Games, not just the athletics, but around other forms of art, helped make the Tailteann Games unique and what they are. I find there's a certain amount of, with people, there's a certain amount of snobbery and reverse snobbery when it comes to the art and sport, where a lot of people who are into artistic pursuits look down their nose on sport, and a lot of very sporty people aren't really interested in the more artistic pursuits. And the idea of having a competition that includes everything, I think, was great and would be great. The idea that sport is also an art form is important, and it's an important message to get across to, I think, people in the arts, that sport is also an art form. I mean, the like of gymnastics is an extreme artistic expression, and I also, as somebody who's particularly into dance, would like to see dance included. I know breakdancing was included in the last Olympics. Doesn't seem like it will remain, which is probably a bit of a pity, as ice dancing is included in the Winter Olympics. I see no reason why things like ballroom dancing or break dancing or that shouldn't be included in the modern Olympics, so that there is some kind of a crossover. So if there was ever to be a competition like the Tailteann Games again, it would probably be more likely to be an expansion of the Olympics into a broader sphere. It's not actually something I think will happen. I mean, I think there was a few raised eyebrows at the breakdancing, so I sadly don't think it will happen. But it's nice to think that our ancestors embraced that idea that we need to be fully rounded people, that we need to be sporty and athletic, and we also need to be artistic, and we need artistic expression hand in hand with sporting prowess. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. If you did, I would appreciate if you could give us a like and subscribe. It would help a lot with me developing the channel a bit better. I've been away for a little while from it, and now I hope to be back to it with a vengeance. If you like this type of content, you like to hear a bit about Irish history and Ireland in general, I'll be expanding into other places as well, to do with ancient, pagan, etc. history. So if you like this type of content, please would you hit the like button, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you'll hear when I produce new content, which I assure you will be more frequently than of late. Slán agus beannacht. Goodbye.